Good afternoon, everyone. It's Tuesday, January 28th, 2025, and it is 3 p.m. And I call this meeting of the Senate Elections Committee to order. And it looks like we do have a quorum. No? Yeah, we do.
Okay. Yes.
So we have a presentation from the Secretary of State's office today, and they will give an overview of the Minnesota elections in general and the elections in 2024 and how well they were run, which was, in my view, one of the best, if not the best, in the entire country. So, Mr. Secretary, we're going to ask you to introduce your co-presenters and also any other statements you have just in organization here. And just for the members, there will be time after the questions, so I'd like you to hold your questions until the people are finished with their presentations. So with that, Mr. Secretary, please identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Steve Simon, Minnesota Secretary of State. It's an honor to be before you as always. I am joined today to my right by the Minnesota State Elections Director, Paul Linnell. Also with me, and you'll hear from him just after the two of us talk, is Bill Ekblad, our election security navigator. And of course, there's a familiar face to the committee. That's our Government Relations Director, Nicole Freeman, who's here as well. We appreciate the committee's invitation to be here today. As I told you, Mr. Chair, I need to leave a little bit early to do certain things over in the other body. But I hope every member and staff member here knows that I'm always available to you. I think every senator has or should have my personal cell number, so I'm always available to you, evenings and weekends included. You want me to come to your office, you want me to come back to this committee, I'm always happy to do that. I just want to give you a quick roadmap of where I see this presentation going. First, I'm going to present some high-level statistics and a summary of the 3 statewide elections held last year. In addition, I'll highlight some of the outreach efforts that our office is engaged in, as you requested. Then Mr. Linnell will give you all a deeper dive into the election administration components, who does what, the training and support that our office provides, the various methods of voting, election night, post-election procedures, et cetera. And then Mr. Ekblad will give an overview of the work his team does to support the physical and cybersecurity of our elections here at the state and with our partners, the counties, the cities, and the townships, and so forth. So why don't we start out with the first slide here. Heading into 2024, I said that I had 2 wishes, even in 2023, as the 2024 cycle was at our doorstep. And the way I sort of framed it was I had 2 hopes or 2 wishes for the 2024 election cycle. My 2 hopes, my 2 wishes were I wanted high turnout and low drama. That's what I wanted. Not no drama. I think that's unrealistic, but low drama. And I think that we did get that. We had high turnout, as I'll say in a minute, in Minnesota, with a lot of people's help and the work of our local election partners and 30,000 election judges. And the election was low drama in Minnesota. I would say from an administrative standpoint, the 2024 election was a huge success. Now, on the next slide, I'll point out that it seems like a long time ago, but the 2024 election cycle really got underway in late 2023 in preparation for the statewide presidential nominating primary on March 5th. Keep in mind, every 4 years, we're asking our partners at the counties and cities and townships to run not 2, but 3 statewide elections, because you have that additional one every 4 years of the presidential nominating primary. So that's a big ask. And I have to say, on a bipartisan, bicameral basis, you as legislators have really responded, first by funding that, making sure it's not an unfunded mandate. And I know, I don't want to speak for them, but I know they're very grateful for that. Not only the resources, but your acknowledgement that running a 3rd statewide election every year is a big deal, particularly for the vast majority of counties in which the person who runs elections wears many hats. That person is just as likely to be involved in inspection work or property tax collection or ditch and drainage work or what have you. And so it's a big ask, and you've acknowledged and recognized that, which I appreciate as well. So at that time in March of 2024, almost a year ago, Minnesota had 3 qualifying major political parties. Each party's candidates appeared on a separate ballot. Counties produced 3 ballots for each precinct. That's a lot. 3 separate ballots. It's not like our August primary where it's all on one piece of paper. 3 separate ballots. The turnout for that presidential primary election was 13.6% of the voting eligible population. That's 585,000 plus total ballots cast. The March 5th election, by the way, was the first that required voting instructions to be translated into various languages, the ones most commonly spoken across the state after English. So materials were made available in Hmong, Somali, and Spanish. Sample ballots were available in any precinct that was designated as a language minority district. This meant that 3% or more of the population said that they spoke English less than very well. Not my language, that's the language in statute, less than very well. From there, counties use census, school district, and other data to determine what language or languages should be supported. 30 counties across the state had at least one precinct that fell within this designation and provided translated sample ballots. The office assisted counties by translating instructions, posters, ballots, and the like into 16 languages for use on Election Day. So after the presidential nominating primary, the township elections were held the next week, and various special elections were held on the uniform dates in April and May. The next statewide election, of course, as we all know, is the regular primary on August 13th. There, we had just shy of 544,000 Minnesotans cast their ballot. It was about 12.8% of the voting eligible population. And let me just say a word about that. I know that senators and staff here probably know this, but just for the benefit of the public, you know, our history in Minnesota, at least, is that there is no straight line between primary turnout and general election turnout. In fact, very often, it looks like what you saw here, where it's somewhere in the low single digits, not very high at all, and yet you fast forward to the November election and we're sky high. I mean, it shows that Minnesotans know how to kind of discern and tell the difference. And let's face it, in August, Minnesotans are doing Minnesota things. They're out on the lake, they're away, they're traveling, and so that's been a challenge as well. So one of the new laws that became effective June 1st of last year was the provision that allowed voters to sign up to be a permanent absentee voter. This means that a voter will automatically receive an absentee ballot for every election for which they are eligible. And as of yesterday, we checked the numbers, it's just over 99,000 voters in Minnesota have elected to be a permanent absentee voter. Now, on primary election day last year in August, students who live either on campus or off campus, but in the same city, were allowed to use the student list provided by their college or university in conjunction with any valid ID to register to vote on Election Day. So this provision originally passed in 2023 and only allowed students to use the student list in conjunction with their student ID. The 2024 legislature expanded the allowable forms of ID to any that are valid for Election Day registration, like a driver's license, passport, Minnesota ID card, etc. So let's see here. Last June, the office also expanded the language offerings for our online voter tools. They're now accessible in 10 additional languages, allowing folks to complete these processes in the language that they're most comfortable with. And you see some examples here. So an eligible Minnesotan can register to vote in Hmong. So that's new. They can actually do it in Hmong. It's not just the information pages anymore that are in other languages. They can actually do it on the website in that language. Or, next slide, a voter could track their absentee ballot in Vietnamese. Another example. So voters can check their registration status and request an absentee ballot now in 11 languages, including English. These translated tools complement the 10 non-English language pages that have been available on our mnvotes.gov website since 2016. Mr. Linnell here will do a deeper dive into the general election, but I just want to give a few highlights. So bottom line, we had 3,272,414 Minnesotans cast their ballot in the November 5th election. That turnout is about 76.4%, and it currently puts us in the #1 spot. Now, big asterisk. Right now, Wisconsin, believe it or not, we still don't have a final number of all votes in Wisconsin. We have estimates, but right now, based on the known numbers, Minnesota is #1 in the nation again, which would make it 4 out of the last 5 that we were #1 in turnout in America. So we're in a tight race with Wisconsin. It's possible that they could pass us, but as of this day, we're #1. 1,304,018 Minnesotans voted before Election Day. That's 39% of total voters who participated in the election. That's big. Now, during the COVID election, you might recall, in Minnesota and everywhere in America I'm aware of, there was a massive spike in the number of people who voted before Election Day, in large part by mail, for obvious reasons. It was during COVID. But then it came back down to earth again in 2022, where it was around 25, 26%. Here, it shot up again. So now it's about 39% voted absentee in some form or fashion, and we expect to see some continuation of Minnesotans taking advantage of those options. Next slide. Often the focus of general elections is on the top of the ticket. That's natural, that's normal. But I won't read all of the stats shown here, but it's interesting to note the variety of state and local contests that are on the ballot as they appeared on the ballot. So now that we have some high-level statistics from 2024, I just wanted to dive a little bit deeper into some of the office's outreach efforts, as you requested. So our voter outreach team is small but mighty. It's 2 people, 2 permanent staff members, and they typically add a temporary staff member to their ranks for the election season in that year. One of the events that our office has been involved in for years is the Students Voting Program. We started this in 2016. Now we're doing it in partnership with YMCA's Center for Youth Voice. We do it every 2 years. We started it in our office in 2016 as for high schools only, but now that we've partnered with the YMCA, we've been able to extend it to all K-12 schools, and they're all invited to participate. So it's a nonpartisan event. Both political parties had a representative serve on the planning committee. This year, 439 schools across Minnesota participated, and we had over 131,000 students cast their ballot. A few of the students are shown here, as you can see. The Center for Youth Voice helped put together a great dashboard that showcases turnout and other data points from the mock election. We really appreciate all of the schools that participated this year. I will just note something that's very interesting. I don't want to lapse into too much political punditry, but people have pointed this out as very interesting. You'll see or hear the results. Now, this is just a subsection. This is 131,000 students, but it very closely by percentage mirrored the overall state presidential result when you see that. It's about a 4-point victory here for the Democratic candidate for president. That's just about what it was in Minnesota. I'll leave to social scientists what that says. Is it just that kids vote like their parents or something else? But I find it, and others have pointed it out to us, and they find it interesting as well. So our office also assisted with the planning of Youth Day at the Capitol. About 600 secondary school students attended last year, most hailing from the 7-county metro and a few traveling in from further away. They met other youth leaders from the Minnesota Youth Council, and after a bit of advocacy training, they visited with legislators. Fellow constitutional officers and I also spoke with the group, and it was a really enriching event, I think. I hope for them, and many of them had never been to the Capitol before, so it was a really great opportunity for them to meet there and other legislators as well. So every September, I'm proud to help celebrate National Voter Registration Day. This is a bipartisan, nonpartisan effort, really, that the National Association of Secretaries of State, on a broadly bipartisan basis, supports and partners with. So this year, the office organized for the first time a virtual statewide high school pre-registration and registration event. 165 high schools took part. They received materials from the office to support events at their schools. 45 participated in the live Zoom event. I was able to visit personally 4 high schools that day: Black Duck, Bemidji, St. Joseph, and St. Cloud, one of the St. Cloud high schools. A related policy that the legislature passed last session was a requirement that public high schools and all colleges that accept state aid must send a dedicated communication in the fall and spring to all students about pre-registration and voter registration. So our office worked just to remind their schools of this requirement that you passed. In addition to information about new legislative requirements, our office worked throughout the year to communicate resources on voter engagement and civic education to colleges and universities across the state. Our outreach team met with staff at post-secondary institutions and spent particular time with the campus vote coordinators. If you recall, that's something that you passed in the last legislative session. Every campus in Minnesota has to have someone who's designated campus vote coordinator. It doesn't mean that's their full-time job. It just means some existing person on faculty is sort of the go-to person for voting stuff. And so that was a real helpful way for our office and many others to just get in touch and make sure students knew what the rules were, understood what the law was and what it wasn't. And I think that was something that's really streamlined the system quite a bit. So a report to the legislature on the voter engagement activities conducted by colleges and universities is coming soon. So we'll have that in your hands as soon as we can. The office was very proud to support the Restore the Vote legislation that passed in 2023 that restored the vote for eligible Minnesotans who have left prison behind. Through this law change, over 55,000 Minnesotans were welcomed back to the voting rolls. The office worked with partners across the state just to spread the word about this. You know, I need to make the point that, you know, our job is to make sure people know what the law is and know what the rules are. Obviously, we don't have compulsory voting in the state. We can't, and nor would we even want to, force or compel anyone to vote. That's their decision, but we want them to know if they have the freedom to vote, that they have that freedom to vote, whether it's old, new, or otherwise. So that's something that we did with a lot of community partners across the state, just spread the word. So last year, our office and you, the legislature, appropriated money for this purpose. And so we sent a letter to all likely eligible impacted individuals. The letter explained the law change, reminded folks of the eligibility requirements in Minnesota to vote, and said that if they met them, here's how they could register, et cetera, you know, either on the provided voter registration application or online. I had the opportunity to visit all of the state correctional facilities. I want to thank Commissioner Schnell for joining me at many of those visits. And at those visits, I was able to meet with many individuals who had 1 year or less of incarceration remaining. And I was clear in these visits that it's each person's right to choose to vote or not to vote, their business, not mine. But I just wanted them to know of the law change and know that if they wanted to take advantage of the freedom to vote, that they would, upon release, have that freedom to vote back. That's it. So during my time at each facility, I not only answered questions about voting, but also about the lawmaking process and how to go about changing policy. And you might find this interesting, senators, that a number of them asked that question. They would say, well, how do I impact the laws that affect me, whether it's city or state or others? And there were several that just had never thought to visit the Capitol or to contact a state legislator. And so whether they follow up, you know, that's anyone's guess, but really intriguing, interesting questions I found. So this next slide, or this slide, highlights several of the other ways that I and staff in our office engaged with the Department of Corrections staff, probation officers, attended community events across the state. We incorporated Restore the Vote information into each of the 79 public-facing events that they attended last year. And there's a lot of work to be done, of course, but I'm grateful to our staff and partners across the state for the work they've done over the last 2 years to welcome these Minnesotans back into elections. And to make sure they just understand what their rights are now. That was the key thing. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Linnell to take it from there, and he'll do a deeper dive into much of the administrative dimension of the election, not only in 2024, but generally.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Linnell, just identify yourself for the recording and continue with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Paul Linnell, and I'm the Director of Elections with the Office of the Secretary of State. I've been with the office since 2022, and I've been in my current role since July of last year. And before coming to the office, I served as the elections lead in Anoka County. Election administration is a partnership between the Office of the Secretary of State, the 87 counties, and the thousands of cities, townships, and school districts in Minnesota. I'll now walk through some of the key elections duties at the different levels in the state. The Secretary of State serves as the chief election official for the state and carries out the official duties prescribed by law, including serving as the chair of the state canvassing board that certifies state elections. The office is responsible for training county election officials and making training materials available for use in training municipal election officials and election judges. The office is also responsible for hosting and administering the statewide voter registration system, or SVRS. County users access this system to enter and update voter registration and absentee ballot information. This database interfaces with data that's received from several agencies to keep voter data and voter records up to date, Those agencies include Driver and Vehicle Services, Social Security Administration, the Department of Health, Department of Corrections, and the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC, which we are a member of. It's a consortium of states that share data on voters that have moved in and out of states to keep our voter rolls up to date. In addition, our office administers the annual list maintenance process in SVRS each January. Through this process, records are inactivated if they do not have voting activity in more than 4 years. Our office also maintains the candidate filing database and election reporting system. For statewide election dates, information from the affidavits of candidacy is entered by state and county users into the election reporting system and then posted to the publicly accessible candidate filings website. On election night, county users enter unofficial results data into the election reporting system, which is then posted to our publicly accessible election night reporting page. Our office is also responsible for certifying the voting equipment for use in Minnesota's elections. Before any electronic voting system is used in Minnesota, it must first be tested and certified by a test lab that is accredited by the Bipartisan Federal Elections Assistance Commission. This is a rigorous testing process that includes system examination down to the source code. Once federally certified, vendors must apply to have their systems further tested and certified by the Office of the Secretary of State. Our office reviews the federal test lab reports and information about the voting system before advancing to the demonstration testing phase. Several requirements are outlined in Minnesota statutes and rules that voting systems must demonstrate before they are certified. If a voting system can successfully meet all of the requirements that are provided in Minnesota law, then our office certifies the equipment and notifies counties that the system is available for use in Minnesota elections. 4 electronic voting system vendors are currently certified in Minnesota, including Election Systems and Software, Democracy Live, Dominion, and Hart InterCivic. Our office also performs post-election performance reviews of counties that are randomly selected at the state canvassing board meeting following the state general election. Those reviews will take place starting next month and will help to provide valuable feedback to improve election administration training and procedures in future election cycles. Secretary Simon highlighted some of the work that our office does to facilitate voter outreach and make our elections more accessible to all voters. Our office also has rulemaking authority to prescribe administrative rules that provide additional guidance for carrying out the requirements in statute. I'll note that our office is not a legal advisor or an enforcement agency, so any election law violations are filed and investigated at the local level. The counties across the state are really at the core of our election administration system in Minnesota and carry out a large set of responsibilities. They are the ones who enter, process, and update voter registration records. Counties are also responsible for ballot development. Our office provides county election officials with training and resources on the ballot development and proofing process, but counties work directly with their vendors to manage the design, layout, and printing of ballots. In a presidential election year, ballots cannot be finalized until late August, which coincides with the major political party deadline to submit their candidates for president and vice president, along with the names of their electors. This also coincides with the deadline for minor parties and independent candidates to submit their petitions to get their name on the ballot for president. Once all contests and candidates have been finalized, counties can work with their vendors to prepare and proof the ballots. In 2024, there were a handful of counties that had errors on their ballots that required corrective actions through the courts. A major contributing factor in these errors was a new process put in place by one of the ballot vendors that was operating in Minnesota. They were admittedly underprepared and under-resourced to provide timely and accurate ballot proofs to all of the counties that were using their services for the 2024 election. When ballot errors were identified, county election officials and county attorneys moved quickly upon learning of the mistakes and took swift action to file petitions with the courts. Our office supported counties and provided guidance on this process when requested. Counties were able to obtain court orders to get the ballots corrected and provide the appropriate remedy to the small number of voters that had already submitted an absentee ballot. It's of course always regrettable when a ballot error is not identified and corrected before it is printed and in the hands of voters. We've met with this vendor during and after the election cycle to review what caused the errors to take place. and corrective action has been identified to ensure they're prepared to provide timely and accurate ballot proofs for their customers in future elections. Our office will also be redoubling efforts to continue providing training and resources for county election officials on the ballot proofing process. Counties are also primarily responsible for purchasing, programming, and maintaining voting equipment. This includes the rigorous testing procedures that take place prior to every election before that voting equipment can be used. This includes the preliminary testing process where every ballot style to be used on a tabulator, whether for counting absentee ballots or ballots cast at the polling place, must be included as part of this preliminary test. For preliminary testing, test decks are created that include marking unique vote totals for candidates in each contest to confirm that test results match how the ballots are marked. Other features must be tested as well, including overvotes, undervotes, and crossover votes to confirm the equipment is counting ballots correctly. Jurisdictions must also conduct a public accuracy test of voting equipment prior to each election. The public is welcome and encouraged to attend these tests to see the voting equipment in action and confirm that it is counting votes correctly. There are minimum requirements for the number of precincts that need to be tested as part of this public accuracy test, and testing must be error-free in order for the equipment to be used at the election. Counties are also responsible for administering in-person absentee voting and absentee voting by mail. Counties also serve as the training authority for municipal election officials and election judges. After the polls close on Election Day, counties compile the election results from the polling places and absentee voting and enter those unofficial results in the state election reporting system. In the days that follow, counties are responsible for the post-election canvassing process to certify the election and complete the post-election reviews. Cities and townships in Minnesota are responsible for determining their precinct boundaries and their polling place locations. They're the employer for election judges, managing the recruitment and appointment of election judges at the polling places. Some municipalities also have additional responsibilities if they've been designated by the county, including training and certifying election judges, administering absentee balloting, and administering healthcare facility voting. In Minnesota, we're fortunate to have a great group of dedicated election officials at all levels across the state. Unfortunately, in recent years, we have seen challenges with increased turnover among election administrators. In 2024, more than 1 in 3 counties had a new lead election official since the 2020 election. Some counties experienced multiple transitions at the county auditor position between the 2 presidential cycles. The Elections and Voting Information Center out of Reed College produces a national survey of election officials each year. They noted that in their most recent survey that nationally, turnover among election officials was twice as high as in previous years. An encouraging finding from that survey was that generally job satisfaction among election officials remains high, but respondents reported increased levels of stress related to their work. Fortunately, although there was high level of turnover in Minnesota, we saw both experienced and new election administrators step up to meet the challenge. Election administrators across the state went the extra mile to assist their colleagues in making sure that they were prepared for their role during the busy year and were able to find answers to their questions. Our team also recognized that turnover would be a challenge this election cycle and devised strategies to help meet the evolving needs of Minnesota's election officials. In early 2024, we deployed Northstar, a resource-sharing platform that provided a library of training tools for county election officials. We continue to add content over the course of the year to address specific training-related needs from the counties. We also streamlined our office's communications to counties, providing weekly emails that outlined important updates, key pieces of information to be aware of, and upcoming deadlines. We also partnered with counties and the Sourcewell Service Cooperative for an overdue update and modernization of our election judge training videos. These videos were made available for local jurisdictions to help with building or supplementing their election judge training curriculum. And we continue to phase in updates to our election administration and election judge guides. Our office is also responsible for administering the biennial County Election Administrator Conference that takes place in the spring of the even years. In 2024, this conference saw record attendance reflecting the growing number of county staff that are involved in administering elections, as well as the increasing need and desire for more training content. The design of the conference was modified to include more opportunities for panel discussions and small group breakouts to gain from the experience and insights of election officials from across the state. We also expanded training offerings to include additional pre- and post-conference learning modules. In addition to this conference, staff from our office offered online statewide trainings, office hours sessions, and we're available for one-on-one check-ins, particularly for brand-new election administrators throughout the year. Our election officials are an incredibly talented and resilient group, and one that understands election administration is a true partnership, from the state to the counties to the municipalities and election judges. It takes all of those parts operating together to make it work successfully. And one area of our elections division that really embodies this partnership is our Election Security Navigator program. And for that next part of our presentation, I'll turn things over to our Election Security Navigator, Bill Ekblad.
Thank you, Mr. Linnell. Mr. Ekblad, please identify yourself for the recording and continue with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Bill Ekblad, Election Security Navigator in the Office of the Secretary of State, and I am here today to provide an overview of our Election Security Navigator program and how it supports county and local election officials in protecting their people, their voters, their facilities, and their processes in delivering safe elections to Minnesota. So our program, like several others similar to it across the country, was born out of the 2016 presidential election season, during which it was learned later that foreign adversaries had attempted to influence U.S. elections through cybersecurity operations directed against elections offices in various states. We spent the first year of our program, which stood up in late 2019, preparing Minnesota counties to be ready for an onslaught of cyber threats in the 2020 election season. Fortunately, that didn't happen. And so for a number of reasons, we were able to go into the 2022 election season with some awareness of additional threat streams and vectors that Minnesota counties were expressing concern about related to physical safety of their personnel, their teams, their voters. And so we tried to work to bring them resources and information that they could use to protect against those types of threats. And in the coming out of, again, thankfully, the 2022 midterm election did not yield those types of threats. And so our batting average in predicting threats was not all that high coming out of 2022. And so we approached 2024 with a perspective of helping our election officials be ready for whatever threats or concerns might come up, really focusing on general readiness and being ready for anything. And I think that has served us well, as I'll speak a little bit more to in just a moment. Next slide, please. So really our approach since day one has been about tying together our stakeholders and making sure that our election officials at the county and local level know that they're not alone, that they have colleagues in neighboring counties across the state who share similar problems and concerns and have solutions that they may be able to leverage as well. We encourage them to share what they're seeing in terms of threats or concerns so that we can leverage resources available to us and to them to make them better prepared to deal with those concerns. See something, say something is a catchphrase we've borrowed from Department of Homeland Security, and we think it applies well to the election security model. What is relevant or noticed in one county at 9 a.m. on election day might be great warning to a neighboring county or 2 counties over by 11 a.m. that morning. That type of model, heads up as best can be provided. We have access to a lot of different sources of support and awareness that our counties can use to keep themselves safe. We partner closely with federal, state, academic, nonprofit, and even vendor partners that provide us with a lot of things that are useful in helping counties be as prepared as possible. We also encourage them to think about ensuring their local populations, their voters, see them as the trusted sources of how elections function and work, and the way that the counties can ensure that their voters are confident in how elections are conducted. We borrow a phrase from Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel a few years ago, who said we must prepare for everything. It's a tall order, but I think if we can convey that to our county election leaders, they can not focus on any particular threat angle and embrace the core broad concepts of preparedness and readiness that can support them through whatever they might face in conducting an election. At the state level, we do focus on ensuring that our statewide voter systems are protected from the county level outward, so that we can ensure that the individuals with access to those systems are properly trained and accounting for their security responsibilities and using those systems so that they're available for all counties and all election officials to conduct elections. And then, as I mentioned, raising awareness of available resources and help that is out there to support counties. In the wake of the 2016 activities that I talked about, a lot of stakeholders stood up and said, we want to make sure this does not become a problem. A great deal of resources at the federal government on down that can be leveraged and taken advantage of. Our job in our program and through our office is to ensure that our local election leaders know about those resources, know how to get them, and can take full advantage and put them to work for them to protect their elections. And then finally, grant funds is something that we have made available in the past through our office to support some of these resources that our counties would like to have that come at a cost. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of some of our partnerships. At the federal level, we do work closely, probably most with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. They have an election security function that has been useful in providing awareness and resources that our counties can leverage. We also partner with the FBI, with the U.S. Postal Investigative Service, and others to ensure that that the federal level resources are available for our local users. We also are tied into a couple of associations that are relevant in this space, the National Association of Secretaries of State and the National Association of State Election Directors. Both spend a fair bit of energy on election security, and we make sure that their support and services are known and available as well. There are some sort of quasi-federal level agencies, the Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, the ISACs. There's one for elections and then one that more generically supports cybersecurity for state and local governments, the MS-ISAC. And then our state partners as well. We work very closely with Minute on things related to cybersecurity of election systems. And I should say that when I say cybersecurity of election systems, we're really focused on the cyber systems that support elections, not the voting equipment itself. As Mr. Linnell mentioned, there's a rigorous process in place at the federal level for certifying the security of those systems, and we do not stand in the way of that. We are focused more on the day-to-day systems that our counties employ, their Windows machines on their desks and so forth, and making sure that they're factoring in security of that equipment so that it doesn't become an issue in how they conduct their elections. And then we also work closely with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and the work that they do to track threats locally, as well as some partnerships with the National Guard and the cybersecurity work that they've done. Next slide, please. Our efforts are multi-pronged. We are engaged really on a daily basis through a couple of online collaboration platforms with all of our counties. We provide and post resources as we become aware of them. We foster discussion about those resources. We encourage the counties themselves to share things that they have learned in those portals, those forums, and try to get them talking amongst themselves about what has worked or what hasn't worked, or what challenges they see that they could use some help in addressing. We conduct tabletop exercises. We held a big one last year at Camp Ripley, in which we invited all counties to attend. Our representation was about half that came in January to Camp Ripley to join us for a day and a half of tabletop exercise and discussion to sort of set the stage for the election year ahead at that point. That was in January. And we hit the road. Our team of 3 has been traveling across Minnesota's highways and roadways. We visited all 87 counties last year to personally engage with the election leaders, the IT leaders, the emergency managers at those levels to make sure, again, that they were aware of the resources available to them and to learn firsthand any concerns that they have. We found that trust and relationships goes a long way in this business. We do not expect or require that they will just make a blind phone call. We want them to know that they can come to us with things that just don't feel right, and we'll help work through that with them and see if there's some assistance that we can provide in that way. And I think with that, my section is concluded.
Mr. Ekblad, and I think Mr. Linnell would like to pick it up from here again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll go ahead and take us to the finish here if it pleases the committee. I'll go ahead and take a deeper dive now into the 2024 general election and some of the statistics, numbers, and happenings that took place. So absentee voting for the state general election got underway on September 20th, and we saw robust turnout throughout the absentee voting period, both in person and by mail. More than 1.3 million ballots were cast via mail or in-person absentee ballot, which was close to 40% of the total votes cast for this election. As Secretary Simon noted, other than the 2020 election, when voters were encouraged to stay home and voted by mail in record numbers, this was the highest rate of absentee voting that we've seen for any election. It represented a big increase from the 2022 state general election, when roughly 27% of voters voted early or by mail. In-person absentee voting in 2024 included an expanded 18-day period where counties had the option to provide the option for voters to insert their ballot directly into an into a ballot tabulator for 18 days, when previously this was restricted to the last 7 days before Election Day. More than half of all absentee ballots were cast in person during these final 18 days. There was also additional time this year for absentee ballot boards to process accept and absentee ballots, with the period expanding similarly from 7 days to 18 days. This helped to ease the administrative burden of opening and processing accepted absentee ballot signature envelopes during the busy final week prior to Election Day. The general election was also the first time that 2 additional weekend days, the second Saturday before Election Day and the Sunday before Election Day, were open to voters. Additional weeknight hours were also added to the Tuesday before Election Day. These proved to be popular, with more than 120,000 in-person absentee ballots that were accepted over the course of those 3 weekend days. Voters really took advantage of the in-person voting in the final days before Election Day. Of the total in-person votes before Election Day, more than 20% were accepted during the final 3 days. And the Monday before Election Day was the busiest during the period, with nearly 90,000 in-person ballots that were accepted on that final day. Several counties also deployed additional temporary absentee locations during this period, including temporary locations on tribal land if requested by the tribe, as well as temporary one-day campus locations. This also provided flexibility to counties and cities, as they were now able to offer additional in-person absentee locations that had different days and hours than a full-time location that was required to be available for the full 46 days. The absentee voting period also saw increased attention around chain of custody. This was due in part to a publicized incident involving the transfer of sealed absentee ballot signature envelopes from municipal locations to be counted at a central county location, where boxes were left unattended for a period of time. In this specific instance, the county took swift corrective action to address the situation. Due to the layers of safeguards and security protocols that were in place, the county could review the materials that were returned and determine that all absentee ballot signature envelopes were accounted for and that none were missing or tampered with. Both the county and our office spoke in strong terms that the incident was not acceptable and did not follow chain of custody procedures. Our office shared additional reminders and guidance to all counties regarding chain of custody requirements and practices to ensure that the incident was not repeated. Looking forward, we've discussed with counties ways in which proper chain of custody can be further enshrined and standardized across the state. In polling places across the state, Election Day went very smooth for election officials, election judges, and voters. Roughly 30,000 election judges stepped up to the plate and worked long shifts so that nearly 2.4 million voters could cast their ballot on Election Day. As with every election, there were some issues that came up during the course of the day, but thanks in large part to the extensive training and preparations that went into the election, there were few incidents that were reported on Election Day. After the close of polls, election judges must tie out that the number of voters that sign the roster equals the number of ballots cast. Election results information is then delivered back to the county election office, where results from each polling place are combined with the results from absentee and mail ballots. Results data files are then uploaded or hand-keyed into the Secretary of State's election reporting system. From there, results files are published to the public election night results webpage, where unofficial results are made available. Our office worked to communicate with media, candidates, and the public prior to Election Day that with the absentee ballot return deadline moving from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m., that results were expected to come in later than in recent years. Several counties did experience a high volume of absentee ballots that were returned during this period of time. Each one of those ballots needed to go through the absentee ballot board review process before it could be accepted and counted. Although the timeline did shift to later in the evening than usual, nearly all counties were fully reported by early morning. We've had initial discussions with counties about approaches to managing the return of absentee ballots with this later deadline and results reporting expectations. There were also a few counties that experienced issues related to posting unofficial results to the Secretary of State's website. During the upload process, incorrect or incomplete files had been uploaded to the election reporting system. When a results file is uploaded for a precinct, that causes the precinct to show as being reported in the system. So when incomplete results files were submitted, the results page may have showed that a contest had 100% of precincts reported, which is correct to say that each of those precincts did have results reported for it, but there was still additional or corrected data that needed to be posted for those precincts. So the results were not complete in those instances. As soon as these issues were identified, the unofficial results were corrected on the Secretary of State's public results page. We've had discussions and are looking at possible options for how unofficial results are displayed to help make this clearer in the future. We'll also look at additional opportunities to work with counties on the results upload process to ensure that sufficient verification is taking place prior to the posting of unofficial results. In the days following Election Day, county election officials are responsible for auditing and proofing the summary statements from the polling places and from absentee voting. It is these summary statements that comprise the official results for the election. The results, again, that are posted on our website on election night are always unofficial. This proofing process is an important safeguard that can identify issues like those that occurred during election night. It ensures that the results are accurate and all statistics have tied out before being presented to the county canvassing board to certify the results of the election in each county. Across the state, counties canvass their results within 8 days after Election Day, part of an expedited timeline to comply with the new Federal Electoral Count Reform Act. Another role that the county canvassing board plays is selecting the precincts to be included as part of the post-election review. After every state general election, precincts are randomly drawn to be included in a public hand count audit for the races of president or governor, U.S. senator, and U.S. representative. This is a required audit that takes place in all 87 counties between 9 and 14 days after Election Day. The number of precincts to be counted depends on the number of registered voters in the county, with a minimum of 2 precincts to be hand counted. The hand count results are compared with the results from the machine counts of ballots cast on Election Day and all absentee ballots. The results from the hand count cannot deviate from the machine count beyond the thresholds outlined in statute, which are essentially 0.25%. This threshold was tightened in 2021, a law change that our office supported. If the difference exceeds the threshold, further precincts must be audited all the way up to the possibility of the entire county being counted by hand. But again, in 2024, as in previous years, the results of the post-election reviews affirmed that the voting equipment used in the election counted the ballots accurately across the state. The certified copies of the county abstracts, along with the completed post-election review reports, are then submitted to our office to be presented to the state canvassing board. On November 21st, the state canvassing board met to certify the results for federal and judicial offices and state offices whose boundaries fell in more than one county. The state canvassing board also certified the results of this year's constitutional amendment question. Following the completion of the appropriate canvass, a losing candidate may request to have the results of their contest recounted. There are no automatic recounts in Minnesota. It must always be requested. If the difference between the winning candidate and the losing candidate is within the margin defined in statute, 0.5% for most contests, then a requested recount is publicly funded. For contests that fall outside of those margins, the losing candidate is responsible for paying the cost of a recount if requested. There were recounts at all levels that took place following the 2024 election, as there are in every election cycle. And similar to the post-election reviews, these recounts proved to be another key transparency measure in publicly affirming the accuracy of the election results. Vote totals and recounts regularly have small changes, which are almost universally the result in cases of voting equipment not being able to determine voter intent. For example, the voter may have circled the voter's name rather than filling in the oval on the ballot. But the recount process consistently demonstrates that the voting equipment accurately counts ballots. Minnesota law also outlines a process for resolving election disputes through the contest process. Election contests must be filed within a defined time frame following the completion of the appropriate canvass. In 2024, there were 2 election contests filed, the residency challenge in House District 40B and the contest in House District 54A stemming from a discrepancy in absentee ballots. The district court opinion in 54A provides a detailed recounting of what took place in that situation. Proper procedures were not followed at the city location during the absentee ballot board process, and those actions resulted in ballots not being properly handled and counted for that election. As has been mentioned earlier, the number of ballots must always be balanced against the number of voters. In the case of absentee envelopes, this is represented by the number of accepted absentee ballot signature envelopes. When those numbers are not properly balanced and accounted for, it opens the possibility for errors to take place. We've reviewed this incident and are looking at ways to work with local election officials to avoid a recurrence in the future through additional resources and guidance, as well as exploring potential legislative changes. As we turn the calendar to 2025, our office will continue to look at ways that we can improve the election system for both voters and election administrators alike. We'll look to build on the partnership between state, county, and municipal election officials and identify opportunities to enhance transparency, security, and accessibility in our elections. We welcome any feedback, input, and questions from the committee. Thank you for the time, and that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Linnell and Mr. Ekman. Now we'll go to some questions, and please be brief on your questions. We have a lot of members here, and I'm going to ask that you ask one question, and if you need to have some clarity follow-up, just have it on the same subject, and then we can all get our chance to ask a question, and if we get through everyone, we'll go back around again. So with that, I think I'll ask the first question. I'd like to find out what your, you mentioned election turnover. We've heard burnout, we've heard lots of things, long hours, all of that. What has been your experience with, we know that we've lost a lot of election administrators, but also judges, if you're finding that we're having to get a lot of additional judges, and even in some cases that we have to have judges go from one district to another district. What's your feel for that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think following the 2020 election, I think that was a real eye-opener for the need to allocate additional resources to election judge recruitment. I think there were a lot of concerns during the pandemic that election judges would shy away from wanting to serve, and we dedicated a lot of resources to outreach and making sure that counties and municipalities were able to recruit enough election judges. So I think we had a built-in infrastructure to be able to provide support for local jurisdictions that were identifying, hey, we're having difficulty filling election judge positions. I don't know that we heard it being directly attributable to the environment that elections are taking place in currently, or concerns. I do think some of the steps that took place to provide additional protections for election workers and election judges provided maybe a layer of comfort to know that their employer, whether it be their city or county, had their back, and if there were issues that may take place at the polling place, that they would be quickly identified, corrected, so that election judges could operate in a safe environment. And I think, by and large, that's what we saw take place on election day, that polling places were adequately staffed with election judges, and that they felt like they were able to operate free from interference or fear or intimidation in carrying out their duties.
Thank you. And now we'll go to the my co-chair, Mr. Curran, if he has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity.
Following that, by the way, we'll go to to your vice chair. So we'll start there with the lineup.
Excellent, thank you. I know the counties have had a variety of challenges, right? There's a lot of work, a lot of changes to be absorbed. But one of the things that stands out is you just kind of finished with it was the tentative results, right? As the polling places or the precincts close out their ballots and the unofficial results are recorded. It's odd we're here at this time when we've had absentee balloting for many years now, and we haven't done anything to kind of make sure that that process is accurate. So what suggestions have you guys decided to look at and how to manage and blend both those in absentee as well as precincts reported, because 100% precinct reported today no longer means what it used to mean. So what are your thoughts?
Chair Coran.
Mr. Linnell.
And Chair Carlson, thank you. Yeah, I think within the limitations of how the election reporting system functions, I think the design is still adequate in being able to capture what the requirement is in law, that results only be posted when a precinct has both their absentee totals as well as their polling place totals. Until those are blended, a precinct cannot upload their results. I think what we saw in a handful of cases this year was incomplete results due to an error in the process of delivering those results from central count equipment into a results server to be able to be uploaded into the system. So I think it speaks to some checks that probably need to take place prior to those unofficial results being uploaded into the system, but also looking at ways. I mean, I think to your point about representing that the precinct has reported those results, if there is an issue with it, that it could be updated to show, this is incomplete or partial. For the one carve out that was passed for the 3 to 8 p.m. Accepted absentee ballots, there was the provision that allowed for counties to be able to report all of their accepted absentee ballot results prior to 3 p.m. And a couple of counties did take advantage of that option. It did require that those counties post the number of accepted absentee ballots that were still yet to be processed, so that data was available.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Linnell, and appreciate the information, and we look forward to a series of opportunities to clarify a variety of operating challenges that the counties currently have. Thank you.
Senator Coran, Vice Chair Coran.
Bar.
I'm sorry, Vice Chair Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, permanent absentee voter list. What procedures are in place to verify that people haven't left, haven't moved, they're still eligible to be Minnesota voters that are on that list? How do you go about verifying that?
Mr. Linnell.
Senator Barr, I believe there are the specific provisions in law that call for a voter to be removed from the permanent absentee voter list in certain situations in the event that an absentee ballot is returned as undeliverable or with a forwarding address for that particular voter. Certain situations where they would not be eligible to be a permanent absentee voter if they are in a mail balloting district. So I think those and similar steps that are in place for processing a voter record more generally that would update so that a ballot would not be sent for voters that have moved out of, certainly moved out of the state. They wouldn't have an active voter record anymore, but also if that ballot is returned, they're required to be inactivated from the list.
Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Follow up, Senator Barr.
So I'm going to give you an example. Kid leaves for college, young adult leaves for college. They're on the permanent absentee ballot list. They can apply to be on that. Is that correct? And then they leave and move out of state, but the parents still live at that address. They could theoretically fill out the ballot and send it back. I mean, what I'm getting at is we want absolute honest integrity in our elections. We want to make sure everyone who casts a ballot is eligible to cast a ballot, but we also want it as easy as possible. I get that. So there's no active, just to verify, there's no active measures on the absentee voter list, right? The permanent list? It's just somebody moved or they didn't fill out a ballot or it gets returned to you, that kind of thing. A ballot gets returned and that's where then you, at that point, you would pull them off. But there's no active measures to make sure everybody who's still on the list is actually an eligible voter in the state. Is that correct?
Mr. Linnell.
Senator Barr, the absentee ballot for a voter that's on the permanent absentee list would follow the same verification procedures at the absentee ballot board that any voter who's requested an absentee ballot needs to go through. They have to complete the identification number, provide that number on the signature envelope to be reviewed by the absentee ballot board and match it with their record in order for the absentee ballot to be accepted. So that step still needs to be completed and confirm that that voter is the one who sent back the ballot.
Thank you, Mr. Linnell. Let's just go ahead and start going down the line here. So it'd be Senator Bolden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I'm not sure who the right person is to answer this, as Secretary Simon spoke about this previously. But my question is about Restore the Vote. And I thank you for all of the work that has gone into trying to reach out to folks to be sure that everyone is aware of the law and the change. And you spoke about all the efforts that have gone on thus far. I'm wondering, are there plans for future engagements and sort of future ways to continue to connect with folks and get that message out to people who are incarcerated and will be out within a short period of time or were previously incarcerated? And then my second question is around the numbers. It was referenced that there were 55,000 Minnesotans who fall into this category. Given privacy rules and whatnot, is there a way to know how many of those 55,000 have actually registered to vote?
New testifier. Identify yourself for the record and proceed with your answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nicole Freeman, the Office of the Secretary of State. Thanks for your question, Senator Bolden. I think what we have planned now, as we're in sort of the first month of the year, some ongoing things. I think that our office will continue to be involved with the Restore the Vote Coalition, which is a group of folks that work with impacted individuals. And so I think we would continue that partnership to continue to build those relationships and get to talk with new folks. I know the secretary did really enjoy doing the tour that he did of the correctional facilities, and so I think that's on the table from our end as well. Some of the other things that were up on the screen, we had some really great conversations with probation officers and folks that support individuals as they're going through the reentry process. And so I think our office would continue to keep those contacts up too, particularly if there's questions that came up. It was a really good spot to be able to troubleshoot different types of leave and things like that. Yes, I feel like there was an end of your question that I'm missing. Oh, the numbers. Yes, thank you. On the data. So our office hasn't compared those two lists right now. I know that we have the list that we mailed to, right? And so I think that it is something that our office could potentially do moving forward. And I know there are a number of other organizations that are regularly work with folks as they're transitioning back into the community, and so they might be interested in that data too, using the public information list and things like that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for your presentation. As you talked about the various investments at the state level, the county level, and the municipal level, can you talk about, are any of those federal funds? And if so, what ways does the federal government sort of support both our elections, but especially our ongoing sort of work that we do with the counties and the municipalities in ways that has been really useful to those organizations?
Mr. Ekblad.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your questions, our report. I think our assistance from the federal level and the resources they provide takes a few different forms. The Help America Vote Act funds that Congress allocated over several years, now several years ago, are what primarily fund, for example, the outreach program that we do through the security efforts. And hand in hand with that is also an accessibility portfolio, if you will, that's available for use of that funding as well. So the travel that we do, the out and about work we do, and then the engagement that we're able to encourage through the counties is all federally funded effort there as well. In addition to that, I would highlight the effort that the federal government puts into funding their own entities to be that forward-facing entity, to include presence here in Minnesota. So we have representatives from that Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency here locally in the state that conduct cybersecurity coordination with us, physical security coordination with us, as well as with MNIT and other state entities and private sector entities as well. So there's that aspect as well. So the federal presence and support is significant, and I think critical to the work that we've been able to do, especially as we've gotten our outreach in the security context, gotten our outreach effort off the ground. Should there be a change to that in the future, I think we could kind of take what we've learned and move forward with it, but it would be somewhat hindered based on the level of support.
Follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Senator Port.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Do you know at this point, I know it's very early news, if the pauses in federal funding will affect any of these programs? And if not yet, would you be willing to report back to the committee as you find that out?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank
Mr.
you, Senator, for
Ekblad.
the question. We do not have great specificity yet. Again, a headline, the ink's still wet on the headline, so we are anxiously awaiting to see how that plays out. We believe that a lot of the resources I just mentioned have already flowed forth over the past several years, so presumably those are solid. But what happens with the future, we are watching to assess, and I'm sure would be willing to provide feedback when we have that figured out.
Thank you. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And given that I'm new to the committee, as I had mentioned last time we met, can you help me, or can you confirm my understanding as to the process for same-day registration? Am I understanding correct that a voter will come in, register same day, and then afterwards, at some point, a card is sent out to the address of which that newly registered voter used?
Mr. Linnell.
Chair Carlson, Senator Lucero, that is, yeah, correct. For Election Day registrants, the proof of residence is captured at the time of registration at the polling place. So one of the acceptable proofs of residence must be presented to the election judge in order for that person to be registered and receive their ballot. Post-election, that data is entered into the statewide voter registration in the same manner that voter registration application would be prior to Election Day, to go through the verification processes with Driver and Vehicle Services and or the Social Security Administration, and then to queue up that postal verification card that's sent to the address provided by the Election Day registrant to confirm their residence.
Senator Lucero, same subject.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So then, of those cards that you mail out, how many bounce backs do you get for address not found, person not found, or any other reason for the cards that might come back for non-delivery?
Mr. Linnell.
Chair Carlson, Senator Lucero, thanks for the question. There is a report that will be provided to the legislature, I believe it's at the end of next month, that will detail all of the reasons for return of the postal verification cards and provides counts by precinct for those cards that were returned, as well as cases where voter identification, the voter could not be verified and were referred for potential further investigation. So that is a required legislative report that we'll have from our office within, I believe it's end of the month, end of next month.
Other, Senator Lucero.
Hey, Mr. Chair, so I'm looking for a count. So maybe you don't have one from the most recent election, but if we go 2 years earlier or 4 years earlier, because I have no baseline, what is is it 5,000? Is it 10,000? Is it 500? What is the count of cards that you get back for non-delivery?
Mr. Linnell.
Chair Carlson, Senator Lucero, I think we're going to see if we can find that number from a past report. I don't want to try to ballpark it without at the top of my head.
Thank you. Senator Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have probably more of a comment. I represent all or parts of 9 counties in southwest corner of Minnesota. And many of these counties are obviously much smaller than what you encounter up here in the metro area. I think one of the challenges for them was the weekend voting prior to the election day. Come election day, it's all hands on deck for these staffs. They don't have large numbers of people assigned to elections. Everyone that's in the office has to help. And having the elections, the office having to be open on the Saturday and Sunday prior to the Tuesday of the election creates a real hardship for them in terms of making sure that everyone is rested and ready to go for a very busy day come election day. And so I had a couple of county auditors call me and they said that is one thing. In light of the number of people that they had show up, they just didn't feel that it was really worth the what they had to go through in terms of staff fatigue and what have you. So thank you.
So we'll start down the other, let's start down the other end. Senator Mitchell. I'm sorry. Senator Matthews. You look alike.
The other M. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to have a question, but I want to make a comment quickly on what Senator Cran brought up, the unofficial results issue. That's a serious problem that's got to get addressed, and I don't know what your proposed remedy will be before the 2026 election. But in my district, in the largest county that I help represent, I want to put a couple numbers out to you that you may not know off the top of your heads. In the last 3 election cycles since 2020, there have been 5 races that are all or partially within my largest county, where the unofficial results initially showed a different winner, and it was later switched that the person who thought they had lost had won, and a person who thought they had won had lost. 5 times in one county in the last 4 years. In 2020, it was a mayoral race and 2 county commissioner races. In this last election, there was a school district as well as a city council race, and that's not even touching some house races like 54A, which is a story in and of itself. That's why I'm surprised that the secretary can come here and try to say with a straight face that it was a low drama election cycle, because if you go down the list of everything that happened, it seemed anything but. I wonder what high drama would be in this criteria then if this last election wasn't. But my question does relate to what we were dealing with in 54A. What's the process? Is there any threshold anywhere where some remedies have to kick into play for some problems that none of us want to see happen? We had a 14-vote margin and 20 or 21 ballots that for whatever reason got discarded and not counted. And it seems like the response is just a collective, well, we'll try to do better next time. Is there any reaction, any type of remedy? And I know the court system, I'm not counting the court proceedings and all of those decisions. Any remedies that are being taken to fix that problem now? Is there any threshold where we'd have to jump in the same election? Is 100 votes, if they were destroyed, would that trigger any kind of action? 1,000 votes. Is there anything anywhere in the avenue at all that would trigger anything more than we'll try harder next time?
Ms. Freeman.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Matthews. So to start with your first comment on races and how those results come in. So depending on when counties get the results back from their municipalities, it's oftentimes, particularly on a precinct, like the election day polling locations, excuse me, it's on a precinct by precinct basis, right? And so sometimes they might be uploading a whole entire jurisdiction at one time. Other times they might, if you know, they get 3 of the 7 precincts in, they'll upload those 3 precincts first and have those match up with the absentee results from those 3 precincts. So to your point, it is possible that once a county starts uploading results, but before, you know, either an entire municipality or a whole school district might be complete, that yes, the quote-unquote winner may go back and forth, but that's not the, I just wanted to clarify if that's what you were talking about. Okay,
No.
it's things after the fact. Okay. Because I know sometimes that's, when I worked at the county, we would get calls from people saying, you know, what happened? And we say, we only had half of your city in, and now we have the whole city in. So I wanted to clarify that first, because sometimes that is happening. To your second question about, you know, procedures around chain of custody and what should be happening with those ballots, and if there is any threshold, I think you said, of what. I don't think that currently in statute there is any threshold that gives our office, and I don't know if you're speaking directly to our office or the courts or, you know, right now I think the remedy that is available was the remedy taken, and that was a recount in an election contest, right? I think that from our office's perspective, we've said that it's unacceptable and that the route that and the path that exists that all of the other ballot boards followed would mean retaining any envelopes, including the ballot envelopes. It also is something that if it did happen anywhere else, that each time that a precinct is processed, at each stage, as each envelope is opened and ballots are extracted, the numbers should be tied out to the number of accepted absentee ballots. Then the number of signature envelopes that you have in front of you, those should always match the number of ballot envelopes. And then as you're taking the ballots out of those envelopes, those 2 numbers should match as well, right? Unless you find that one is empty, and then that should be logged. That specification, I believe, is in rule if it's not directly in statute. And so I think that there are ample processes and procedures that exist right now that, and so I guess that mean that we didn't see this happen across the state, right? We saw this, it did happen, and procedures weren't followed that are outlined in state statute and state rule. And so I think if there's a conversation about another way for discrepancies like this to be handled, we're certainly open to having a conversation. But right now, to my knowledge, there's nothing in statute that would allow, you know, our office to be involved at all in this, in that situation. But I'm not sure if I'm not understanding at what point you're wanting us to get involved either. So happy to clarify.
Follow up, Senator Matthews?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate that response. Yeah, to my first part, no, there's a period where candidates feel like the dust has settled, everything looks in, and later adjustments come in. And this last time, phone calls had to be made by county staff. Those are not good phone calls that have to be made, and they bred a lot of distrust in the entire process. With 54A, guess the question is, are you saying that these types of mistakes never, almost never happen anywhere, or we just don't catch them because we might not see a few ballots where the margin is 1,000 or a large margin. Are you saying we had a system where we had 14 votes plus 20 lost in the same one as by pure coincidence? Or we have a process that we do have accidents in place and we just never notice them because they don't make any difference in large margin results?
Ms.
Thank you.
Would you like to
Yes, I can.
respond to that?
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely. Thanks, Senator Carlson and Senator Matthews. So I think what I'm saying is that the way that the process is set up in statute and rule, it requires, just like on election day, the total number of, on election day, it's the people that signed in, right? Need to match the number of ballots you have physically, as well as the number that were processed by the machine, by the ballot tabulator. At the ballot board, the numbers that you're tying things out, counties might use a different sort of, a different form maybe, but you generally have a form that follows the ballots through the whole process. So as they come in and are accepted, how many accepted ballots do you have in, ABC precinct number 1? Then as you're, like I said, when the time comes for the ballot board members to extract those from the envelopes and separate them, at each stage of that process, you're counting, okay, I have 15 signature envelopes, then I should have 15 ballot envelopes. Okay, I'm gonna set my signature envelopes aside because I've taken all of the ballot envelopes out, right? And then as you're taking the ballots out, they're checking that they're from the right precinct, as well as then counting them, right? And making sure that there's 15 of those and 15 empty envelopes. Then the empty envelopes can be set aside, and then you're examining the ballot to see if there's write-ins that need to be dealt with at that time, or if there's any, sometimes you get ones with like spilled coffee on them and things that need to be duplicated, right? So, and then once they're done being handled by that set of election judges, then they go into the tabulation room. And as they're tabulated, then that number also should read 15. That's on the machine of how many were tabulated, right? So at every stage of the process, there should be a 15 across the board on those log sheets. And so I don't think that it's something that's happening and not being recognized across the state. I think that there are situations where, again, it's logged and documented, but sometimes we get back, the counties would get back a empty ballot envelope. And anytime that happens, there's a incident log for the ballot board. And it's documented there exactly what occurred and who was at the table, the party balanced election judges working there, right? And so if there was a situation where you had someone where your sign-in number or the number of applications was higher than the number of physical ballots that were tabulated, it would have to be documented. And so I shouldn't say that might never occur, that there be a discrepancy, but when it does occur, there needs to be documentation of what's going on. And that's something that counties are looking at then before they go to their county canvassing board. If their numbers aren't tying out across the board at the polling place and the absentee ballot boards, then they're going back and investigating that, figuring that out ahead of certifying their canvassing report.
Thank you, Ms. Freeman. Next is Senator Marty. Doesn't have a question. Senator Swazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for coming in today. I just want to, I have a question, but I do want to let the person or people know at your office who are in charge of all this youth engagement and getting kids excited about the voting and trying to turn them on to civic engagement and what their responsibilities will be as fledgling adults. I just think that's an invaluable thing that your office is doing. So thank that person, whoever that person is, unless it's one of you three. But my question is, do we have any information yet on the success or failure of getting 16, 17-year-olds to register, which we started doing recently? And do we have any information yet. I know it's premature, maybe it's a year away from having more information on that, but I'd appreciate anything that you guys would have at this point, if anything.
Linnell.
Chair Carlson, Senator Swedzinski, I know we had, at last check in the total numbers that of 16 and 17-year-olds that had pre-registered to vote, I think there were just over 33,000 16 and 17-year-olds. And I know there were some media requests for that data going back into the fall and kind of the busier stretches leading up to the end of the pre-registration period, where we looked at voter registration as a whole, but also the pre-registration numbers. And I know as part of the outreach on National Voter Registration Day, and that week in particular, we saw a high water mark of more than 4,000 16 and 17-year-olds that pre-registered to vote during that week alone. So I think in part that outreach effort and other national efforts like National Voter Registration Day, 16 and 17-year-olds seem to be interested in this idea of taking care of the work ahead of time, getting registered, so that when they do turn 18, then they'll automatically be registered and not have to worry about filling out the form when they turn 18.
Thank you. Any follow-up? Okay, Vice Chair Westman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for your presentation today. I really appreciate it. And I just want to offer my thanks in addition to Senator Swedzinski. I believe that, as Ms. Freeman has explained, this is a process that is staffed by human beings that occasionally make mistakes. And I would certainly want to make sure that we are doing what we can to reduce and eliminate human mistakes as much as possible, but there's a big difference between someone who's made a mistake or potentially even careless versus an intentional act. And to my knowledge, there's no allegation that any of this was intentional. So I just wanted to put that out there. We established the voter account in 2023, and I don't know, Ms. Freeman, maybe you're the best person to answer this particular question, or maybe not, but I'm curious to know what the success has been in terms of utilization of those funds and how they've been used. If you can talk a little bit about our voter funds.
Mr. Linnell.
Thank you, Chair Carlson. Senator Westland. Yes, our staff has been working in the last few days. I think at the end of the month, we have a report that's due to you all to outline the expenditures from the first allocation of those funds covering the 2023-24 fiscal year through June 30th. So in looking at the expenditures, it showed, I think, 3 categories where those were primarily being spent, which was voting equipment, hardware and software, and then staffing and election judges. And the funds were largely being put to use. I know there's some flexibility with the voter account in that the funds can roll over into the next year, and maybe some thought that jurisdictions may look to save up funds for a larger scale equipment purchase. And it from the reports that we've received, shows that the large majority of counties have expended either some or all of the funds that were allocated to them in that first year. So I think it provides the flexibility to be able to use them as far as whatever is going to make most sense for that jurisdiction. The other thing to note was that with that fiscal year ending on June 30th, it didn't cover really through the state primary or the state general election, so it's likely that those funds that may have rolled over were actually spent during the course of administering either of those 2 elections as well. And then, of course, we'll have similar reporting next year that will cover the next allocation and continue onward.
Thank you. I have another question, and that is that you mentioned youth voting in high schools, and I'm not sure if this is something that you personally were involved in, or the secretary or Ms. Freeman, but what has been the draw for students in high school? And when you have these mock elections, do you have them volunteering? Are they just interested, or are they fulfilling a requirement of a class or a requirement of some kind of credit? And I guess I'd like to just see or understand how enthusiastic we have with high schoolers getting involved in elections. Ms. Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I can speak a little bit about that. Our staff member, Michael, was the one who really headed up that whole effort. But some of what he shared with me is for both the mock election as well as just more generally, we had materials that were created and available for teachers to use to be able to teach around around the subject of the mock election and what's going on before and the preparation and afterwards as well, and to talk about, sort of what's happening outside of school, right, too, and the national landscape of it all, again, depending on if it's, the kindergarten class or, a 12th grade AP government class, right? Teachers could, of course, modify that as they saw fit, but, and then I have to imagine, just because it was something that was run by volunteer, folks at the YMCA, but mostly run by the teachers and the staff at the school. I'm sure that they also did, really get the kids involved. I only saw pictures and heard stories, and so, I saw the picture of one of the students whose job it was to hand out the stickers and other things like that. So I have to imagine the students were involved in the whole process.
Thank you, and I do have another follow-up on that same issue, and this is probably something that any one of you could answer. And I think you talked about 30,000 people that were between 16 and 18 years old, or they pre-registered. Do we have a feel for what the increase was that may have been the bill that we passed where a 16-year-old could pre-register? They didn't have to turn 18 before the next election. Do we know how successful that was?
Chair
Mr.
Carlson,
Vanel.
I guess those numbers would maybe speak to that particular law change. Previously, it was 17-year-olds that were turning 18 prior to the next election day that were able to sort of pre-register, and expanding this now down to any 16 and 17-year-olds. So I guess those are the snapshot of the numbers as they currently stand, and I think the impact of when that law took effect. I don't know that we have data to show how many 16 and 17-year-olds then turned 18 and voted in this particular election. But I think we can expect that as the law is in place for a longer period of time, that those numbers would continue to grow.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions from members? Senator Westland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I'm not sure who, but maybe Ms. Freeman did this. So getting back to sort of the chain of custody issues, and I think you made the point that that this is not something that has been a system-wide problem. It was an incident that happened with a particular person processing ballots. And would one of the possible solutions to this may be that we require, either by statute or by rule, that just all of the ballot materials have to be held, like that nothing can be thrown out for like a period of time, maybe through the end of the contest period?
Ms. Freeman, you have this on your fingertips?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Carlson. Yes, Senator, I think that that's something that we're considering. I think that from, our perspective and in our current guidance, we feel like it's clear that you need to keep those materials, again, just to make sure that a ballot isn't stuck in an envelope, or something like that might be happening. But I do think it's something that we are open to considering this year, to be really crystal clear about sort of anything that might come inside that envelope should be kept through the contest period, and that yeah, it ends up being some like garbage cans in the corner of your absentee ballot room or something like that, sort of waiting for sometimes several weeks. But I do think that that's something that we're considering clarifying to just make it really clear that all of that should be kept in case something like that happens in the future. Yep.
Thanks. Thank you. We have Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on that note, the question, if I understood correctly, was pertaining to chain of custody, but the answer was given was more of a retention thing. So when I'm thinking chain of custody and retention, there was obviously two different issues. So I'm not entirely sure that the answer was pertaining to the question, but both are very important. Chain of custody, the steps involved with that to ensure integrity from the handoff of every person that touches the ballots, and then retention is obviously also separately but equally as important. So just wanted to put that clarity out there as a difference between retention, period, and chain of custody. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Senator Lucero. Any comment, Ms. Freeman, on that difference and
Sure, just briefly, Chair and Senator, thank you for that clarification. You're right. So yes, I think that, I think statute is clear that folks that are handling ballots, you know, there need to be 2 people, they're members of the ballot board. There's requirements for, if you even enter the room where those voted ballots are kept, there's a log, and it should always be 2 people that are doing that. So I do think, the chain of custody piece is really important too. And I think that we're looking at and open to having conversations about how we can improve and clarify chain of custody in our elections too. I think right now we have really robust procedures, but I think as counties and cities might do things differently, there might be a potential to there's an opportunity to maybe spell that out a little bit more about how each county or city is planning to do that, and how those handoffs will happen, and you know, the, more details on that information. So yeah, thanks.
thank you. Any other questions, burning questions that people have? So we'll get more chances, I'm sure, as we hear our bills, especially if we're going to try to improve the process to take maybe some of the sharp edges off of it. So we're going to have a meeting on Thursday, and the gavel will be turned over to Co-Chair Coran, and we're going to advise of the bills that are going to be heard then, but you'll have to watch your emails for that. Just been advised, those are SF 600 and SF 634. Those are the 2 bills we will be hearing on Thursday. And like I say, Senator Coran will be the chair. So with that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.